Writing Python code does not require writing classes. Unlike many programming languages, you can accomplish quite a bit in Python without ever making a class. So when are classes typically used? The most common time to use a class in Python is when using a library or framework that requires writing a class. For example, users of the Django Web Framework need to make a class to allow Django to manage their database tables. With Django, each model class is used for managing one table in the database. Each instance of every model represents one row in each database table. Many Python programmers create their first class because a library requires them to make one, but sometimes you may choose to create a class all on your own. Sometimes you'll find yourself passing around the same object or group of objects into many different functions. For example, here we have functions that use IMAP to connect to an email server and download messages. We can use this code like this. We call the getConnection function to get back a server object, but then note that we're passing that server object in to each of the other functions that we use. What if we refactored these four functions to instead be methods on a class? We've made an IMAP checker class here, and it attaches the server object that we were using before to each instance of the class. And then we've made methods that operate on that server object. The code that uses this class looks a bit different from the code that used our four functions before. We make an instance of this IMAP checker class, and then we call methods on it. Note that we're not passing around a server object. Instead, we're calling methods on a server object. I find this code here a little bit more readable than the code that we had to write before, where we were passing around a server into separate functions. This is really the most clear-cut use of a class in Python, when you have data and functionality that really belong together. You can store the data as attributes on each instance of your class, and you can store the functionality as methods on the class itself. Not every use of a class is quite as obvious, though. For example, Python's getTerminalSize function in the shutil module actually returns an instance of a class. Now, this could have returned instead a two-item tuple of the number of columns and the number of lines in our terminal, but instead it returned a terminal size object that has a columns attribute and a lines attribute. You may find that you don't often need to make your own classes in Python. Python's built-in data types are pretty great, but classes can sometimes make your code easier to read, and more importantly, when used well, classes can sometimes make code that uses your code easier to read.